Thomas, you're very active in interreligious dialogue. What have you learned from your dialogue and conversation with other leaders of other religions?
I've learned a great deal. We began doing this in earnest while at Spencer, which happened to be geographically located in the same place with a lot of the teachers who had come after the Second World War to the West, and were setting up retreat houses. One of which was quite close to us, the Barry, the Insight Meditation Center was only a half an hour away. And so in the 70s, we began meeting some of the teachers that came there who wanted to check out a Christian monastery to see what they were doing. And that was mostly a Buddhist tradition, and in particular the Vipassana Buddhist meditation practices derived from Theravada Buddhist practices or teaching in Southeast Asia. And so I met some of these remarkable teachers and was very impressed with them. And one of them, we shared a day together at the monastery and shared the problems we had in the monastery. It's about the same, I would say, regardless of the particular religious context. But perhaps a more prolonged experience of the Eastern religions took place over the past 30 years here at this monastery in Snowmass, where we had an interreligious dialogue dating from about 1984. So it's about almost 30 years old. And I think it has evolved. At first we tried to find out if we agreed about anything, because I think most people thought they were hopelessly in disarray. And we came up with 8 points of agreement and observed that we all use substantially the same methods, though in different ways and with a different belief system in many cases. But the most important thing I learned from that situation, the same people often came back for a number of years. Some have died since then, and some had to move on because of the press of other duties. And some were hesitant about very few interreligious dialogue. It depended on their cultural conditioning. But what was obvious to me, of course, was that these people have just as much and perhaps more grace than I have or had at that time. And that they were very sincere and were making, significant human sacrifices to pursue, especially longer periods of meditation, very intense sessions or retreats for instance, in the Buddhist tradition, where they meditate 11 or 12 hours a day for about a week and so on. So this shows us a lot of dedication, but it was fairly common in Buddhist circles to attend a session. And while I still was at Spencer during the 70s, we also received teachers from other traditions, especially Zen teachers who gave sessions in our neighborhood using one of our retreat houses and inviting some of the monks to take part who were interested. And I tried to attend as much as I could, and I was very impressed with his stage shows and presentations. He had no knowledge of Christianity whatsoever, but because of his own growth, I would think, in consciousness through the Buddhist practices, he could see the meaning behind in some of our practices. And he admired very much the rituals at the Mass. And in fact, he said to us, if you make the sign of the cross a few hundred times a day and attend Mass and do manual work, you can be enlightened in a couple of years. Well, I think that was a little optimistic, given the fact that we have other things on our mind and that actually were more hindrance than help, perhaps, than if we just did the three things he suggested. But their dedication to meditation was extremely impressive, and one of the things I certainly learned from them was the idea that a structural background, such as the monastic schedule, however good it was in reducing things from the environment that are useless or harmful even, how at the same time a meditative practice that adjusted those external observances to the particular individual was important, and that it seemed to me that we tended to lack as an institution. In other words, the practices have to be adjusted to the individual. And in a community, you sometimes have observances that are for everybody, and that everybody's attendance is needed or demanded for the support of that project. At the same time, over time, some people may not be attracted to that as a lifestyle, or they may outgrow it in some respects, or their level of consciousness may require a moderation of it, or an introduction of other elements. That there's certain elements in other traditions that are very useful too. They're forms of meditation, but we have comparable forms of meditation in the Christian tradition too, pretty well worked out by as long ago as the fathers of the desert. But without applying the structures or the observances to the individual conscience and attractions, something is missing. And that's why I saw, and that was one of my motives for introducing a method of contemplative prayer that would do precisely that, by introducing someone to the period of private prayer in which they cultivated interior silence, rather than depend entirely on outside inspiration through the scriptures or the rituals, even the rituals of the Eucharist and so on. I would say what I've learned from other traditions is the value and importance of extended daily periods of silent prayer, and there are different practices that centering prayer offers an opportunity. But it was originally designed for people in an active life who didn't have much time, and we were only asking 20 minutes. But most of the teachers I've consulted with think from whatever tradition, that 20 minutes twice a day would do it, would engage the unconscious and so on, if it was every day. and that one would then perceive how to add time to it as you grew older or had more experience and did the prayer, it would spontaneously draw one to pray a little more at certain times, have a yearly retreat that would be, our intensive retreats are inspired by Sesshin, in which there's much more emphasis on meditation than anything else. So that has proved very helpful for people who've done that every year and so on. And I think that's asking a lot of a person who's trying to earn a living and prepare for the future, and as a family to send to college and all those things. But
well, that was a wonderful gift that you received from the dialogue with
yes.
the other leaders.
Yes.
Was there anyone in particular or that has touched you from other religions, other religious leaders?
Yes, they all.
All of them have?
I think I learned from all of them.
Yeah.
And I admire especially our non-aligned member who doesn't belong to a particular religion, but is very, he has inherited a lot of the Native American tradition, something of a,
what is his name?
Shaman, Roger Laborde. And, but we had certainly all the major religions represented, and by someone who really embodied those traditions in an outstanding way. And so that was something else I learned, that you can become friends with people who differ from you on the in very basic tenets, like the idea of a personal or an impersonal God that arises in Buddhist Christian dialogue. I don't find that a problem anymore. I did originally, and but so come back to the Snowmass group as we got tired of discussing religious agreements or differences. It of itself emerged into interspiritual dialogue in the last 10 years, I'd say. But gradually, without our really noticing it, so that we discussed more the rituals or practices that helped us in our particular journey. So the friendship largely deepened, and so I think the of making friends or providing the environment in which free dialogue, not always speaking about religion or spirituality, can flourish is essential for deep dialogue, because you have to trust other people to share your interior life with them as deeply, as honestly as this group has done. Interreligious dialogue is a comparison of the essential points of belief that we explain in order to see if there's some points that we agree on, or whether they can be, the same reality can be put into words that are different, or concepts that are different. In other words, how much do the cultures differ of a religious character? And can certain points be perceived as different ways of saying the same thing? So we did that for some years. And as I say, we got a little weary of doing that. And we got more interested in discussing some of the questions that arise in people who have advanced in their particular practices. In other words, what is the experience of meditation as it evolves? So the stages of prayer or the stages of consciousness begin to come into focus, and how they bring about a different perspective. And are they all going in the same direction? Are they already there in some respects? These are different questions from discussing doctrinal differences and perhaps psychological practices.
So it was a movement really from theology, if you would, to a practice.
To experience.
To experience.
I mean, how are these theological principles furthered and expressed, and where do they lead, in other words? So, unlike a seminary, which has little, very little usually, meditation or practice, and too much emphasis on intellectual discussion, it was much more of a practical discussion of what helped them most in their progress, and we didn't discuss a lot the isolated experiences necessarily, though sometimes they might be mentioned, because everybody agreed that it's a state of consciousness that's permanent, not an occasional experience of consolation or insight that's important. So it's the whole person that is becoming more whole all the time that is the object of interest to us, I think, from our perspective traditions. And also what happens is a deeper understanding and respect of the other religions without agreeing, feeling one has to agree with everything they say. So the movement of interspiritual dialogue is just beginning, really. But it suggests that getting on well together and communion is in the search is more important than most differences, and essential to respect each other. And now we're raising the question whether we can really be faithful to our own religion without loving all the others who are trying to go in the same direction. Vatican II has given us permission to acknowledge this work of the Spirit in other religions. This is an enormous breakthrough in cultural attitudes. Doesn't mean that we are not wedded to our own religion or that it works best for us. But it certainly it doesn't mean outside the church no salvation. And that's an attitude that is takes a while to change or die, because nothing awakens the loyalty of a person more than his own religion, especially if it's working well for him or her. But it's the attitude of towards missionary work has to be adjusted towards emphasizing collaboration and communion rather than conversion in our day, because of the terrible damage that religious wars especially get intertwined with politics has gotten to such a point that no one wants to practice any religion at all if they're...
The danger in inner spirituality is that you could really water down one's particular faith or beliefs for the sake of harmony and communication.
It's not necessary. It's a hazard, but a mature interspiritual dialogue states it's what it really believes very honestly.
Yeah.
So, because that gives the other party a chance to dialogue
Right.
with you. If you're watering it down, you're not getting what the person believes. So by stating what one actually believes, one, I think, can avoid that danger. Honesty and transparency go with any friendship can be helpful.
Well, it's almost like you're going into uncharted territory when you move into the inner spiritual, because there's such a danger of ending up being politically correct, if you know what I mean, where rather than in a certain sense get the gems of one's religion and share it with each other. But like you said, if there's a maturity there, it's pretty quite an interesting adventure.
Yes, well, we would all agree that one needs to be well established in one's own tradition and its disciplines to be able to integrate what might be helpful or a helpful insight from another religion or a reinforcing insight. So one of the fascinating things is the efforts of some people, especially some of the Westerners that went to India, try to live the gospel and to understand the Trinity in the light of Advaitic Hinduism, which stresses the oneness of everything. So there's much more light being thrown through dialogue on what the real issues are, and a capacity to see other concerns as secondary or not really substantial, that may enable us why certainly no one religion can contain the whole of God's wisdom. It's infinite, and no religion, as far as I know, is infinite. So it for those who are really interested in the truth, all religions have a certain amount of cultural accretions that need to be filtered out if possible, that burden people in some degree with ideas or practices that were really coming from a earlier or pagan cultural conditioning. So where Panikkar is so useful in interspiritual dialogue, it seems to me, is that he really bridges two great traditions, Hinduism and Christian, and has studied their sources and their scriptures in great depth, and who has a lot of exposure to Buddhism and so on, and has open to science, and he looks at each tradition and acknowledges what they have contributed, and also points out the limitations of certain aspects of the teaching, so that the final answer to the ultimate truth, or what is the ultimate experience of God in this life, is perceivable as much more complex than we thought, and that we need the contributions of all the religions in order to enrich the basic core of wisdom of the human family itself. If we don't do that, we get the defensive attitudes that have led to violence and are still leading to terrible violence, however much they're intertwined with political motives, that need to be transcended in the evolutionary process without in any way ceasing to be rooted in our own tradition.